So Jane, you had quite a traditional route into journalism, but a very untraditional route into wine through living in Asia. Can you tell me how your kind of first tastes of wine were in terms of fine wine and getting into it?
I guess living in Asia, when I was in Hong Kong, it was not the fine wine hub that it is today. I was there from 94 to 97, so really until the handover, and we were drinking Paul Masson jug wine. We were definitely not sipping Patrice with all of the sommeliers in the peninsula. That was not happening. But I was getting into the idea of it, and I remember starting to really love some Italian wines, and that was probably the thing for me that first switched me on to seeking out wines and remembering the names and going back to them with certain Italians, Carmignano and in Tuscany, and just some things that started getting me quite excited. But I didn't start studying it until I got back to London, and then I did the WSET courses. But even then I was still writing about other things. I was managing editor of online websites, and I was not really writing about wine particularly. I'd done one or two kind of political stories about wine from when I'd been in South Africa, but it wasn't a full-time job until I moved to Bordeaux in 2003. And then when in Rome, I just dived right in.
Excellent. And how was it getting into the wine scene in Bordeaux in 2003 as a young woman?
Well, I was very, very, very lucky to go to Decanter when I just moved to Bordeaux. I basically just knocked on the door of Decanter. I sent them an email when I moved to Bordeaux. Probably I'd been there about 3 months. And I went to see them, and they had the experts who were writing. They had Stephen, they had James, but they didn't have somebody who was on the ground who was a journalist and who didn't mind getting their hands dirty, just trying to find out news stories. So I just used the skills that I had already as a reporter, and that was my route in. And once you have the name Decanter, it was very helpful in Bordeaux particularly. It opened lots of doors, and people were very kind to me. People like Jean-Michel Caz, Denis de Bourdieu, Jean-Claude Berrouet. These people were really my mentors when I moved there, were just very open and gave me books that they said, oh, you need to read this to get into the background. So I had the René Pijassou, which is this huge 2-volume, tiny type about the history of mainly of the Medoc. And when I first got it, I thought, oh, I'm never going to read this. But it turns out that I have read it quite a few times, and I still go back to it. It's very useful. That was from Jean-Michel Caz. And yeah, I think it worked in my favour in a way, that I didn't know really anything at all. I had basics about wine, but I really didn't have any. I wasn't intimidated particularly by Bordeaux because I didn't know enough to be intimidated.
Fantastic. And now you're a very experienced Bordeaux taster, and have been doing this for a fair time.
Yeah, 15 years now, crazily.
I have many questions related to that, but my first is, most Bordeaux, 90% is under 15 euros.
Yes.
What are your hot tips for someone who doesn't want to spend too much on Bordeaux and drink something delicious?
Okay, so I think it's difficult to go to the Bordeaux Superior appellation and buy blind. I think you probably need to have, there are a couple of great names, people like d'Espagne. There are probably 10 names that I would say within the Bordeaux Superior appellation are safe bets. But probably if I'm looking to spend under £15, I'd go to Fronsac, I'd maybe go to Moulis, to Listrac, to these appellations which are adjacent to Saint-Emilion, adjacent to Saint-Julien and all the famous names. So they have slightly higher per bottle price, so they can invest more in the winemaking, but they're not famous enough to charge the big bucks. That's probably where I would go to for value.
Excellent. And
and white Bordeaux, mustn't forget. White Bordeaux is an inexpensive and great value.
Especially this year.
Especially this year.
And you write your weekly Decanter column, which is probably how most of us know you. What's the process of writing a weekly column? How do you come up with something new every week?
It's a good question. I just try to, I think probably it really helps having been a journalist, the background of being a reporter. I just find certain stories that I find interesting, and I think if I find them interesting, I hope other people will do as well. And I really try to find human interest stories behind the big names, or just I try to make it, sometimes it's about tasting, sometimes it's more geeky about how they make the wine, sometimes it's just personality driven. But it's a fascinating rhythm that you get into with the weekly column.
Fantastic. And you've just released, last year, your new book, Wine Revolution. How close are kind of organic, biodynamic and sustainable wines to your heart, and how much do you see consumers' attitudes change towards them?
Living in Bordeaux, it's been really interesting because Bordeaux is seen as being big business. It's seen as maybe not being as close to the vineyard as Burgundy is and other areas. So that was quite a challenge for me to be based in Bordeaux and to be trying to learn more about organics. I'm not an expert, and I didn't want to come from the point of view of an expert. I wanted to come from the point of view of somebody who loves food and loves the kind of philosophy of people who are close to their vineyard and who care about what's in it and the ingredients in it in the way that a great chef would do. So that was really my kind of entry point. And it was fascinating to work with sommeliers. I thought, again, I'm going to go to people that know more than I do about the best wines of the world and what foods they'll go with. And so every single wine in that book has got a suggested accord mets vin, whatever the English word for that is, so thank you very much, a suggested pairing. And it was really, I honestly have never enjoyed writing a book so much. It was just fascinating. I had so much fun. People sent lots of wines to me in Bordeaux, or I'd come back to London and I'd do tastings there at different wine bars or with different sommeliers. And just getting to know, what I found was exciting about the way these wines are made, particularly probably biodynamics, is that the winemakers have to be close to their vineyard. You can't make a wine in that way unless you are out in the vineyard every day and really following the whole process from beginning to end. And so just meeting people that felt so passionate, I think reawakened for me as well the passion of wine, the kind of real excitement of finding a great bottle of wine that makes it just sing out of the glass. And so I love that. And I did find a lot of great Bordeaux producers who work that way. I couldn't put them all in because I wanted to be fair and put lots of different regions in. But it really opened my eyes as well that Bordeaux has got a ton of young producers who care about making wine that's terroir driven and fruit driven and vibrant.
Excellent. And I've got two more questions. I just have a feeling we're getting a plane. Can you see one?
No?
Okay.
No?
All right. What's the most challenging article you've ever written? What's the most challenging story that you've written?
The most challenging thing I did was to write Bordeaux Legends, the book about the first growths, because it hadn't been done. I was definitely not that well known. I started it in 2008, I guess, so I've been in Bordeaux for 5 years, and I knew I wanted to write a book, but it was probably totally nuts to start right at the top of writing a book about the 5 most famous states in the world. And I can remember going to see Paul Pontellier, who sadly is no longer alive, but I went to see Paul Pontellier, and I said to him, I'd like to follow you guys for a year, to do the 5 first growths, to follow 1 year and see what it takes to make those kind of wines. It actually evolved much more into a much bigger saga of their whole scope from beginning to end. But that was how I first saw it. Again, I guess a journalist point of view of how they kind of work. Anyway, and he said, yes, he said, we've got nothing to hide. We trust you, you can follow us, no problem. And I can remember getting out and calling my husband and saying, oh God, he said, yes, now I have to write the thing. I can remember the terror, thinking, oh my God. But anyway, that was probably the most challenging kind of route into a story.
Excellent. And your proudest moment in your career so far?
I don't know. I really don't know. I think, well, getting that finished was great. I started it without a publisher. When I was halfway through, I found a publisher, but they said, you've got to sell 2,000 copies before we will sign on the dotted line. And I'm a journalist, and I don't know how many other journalists feel the same way, but selling is really, really hard. But I got on the phone and I called up wine merchants around the world and said, would you like it? And I managed to sell 2,000 copies. So that was probably my proudest, but not a journalist moment.
My last question is something I can't not ask. A woman who tastes ombre mer all the time, how do you keep your teeth white and clean?
Well, I think if we were doing this interview at 5 o'clock tonight, you wouldn't be asking that question because they wouldn't be white. But whenever I go to the States, they're harder to find in England or even in France, but I buy the little mini throwaway toothpaste that's in every single, toothbrushes, they're in every single pharmacy in the States. They're kind of my key for ombre mer.
The survival tip for living in Bordeaux.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you.